Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Pseudoregalia. In the last part, we found our way into the underbelly finally, exploring the final area of the game alongside getting Sybil's last main movement upgrade, and now it's time for us to actively go finish off the game. We're back now in Sansa Keep, because now that we have the Ascendant Light, we can go through this chain of rooms I haven't entered yet, which requires both heavy use of it alongside all of the other abilities in the game in order to finally access the major key here in Sansa Keep. Now, off the top of my head, I believe I've actively seen some people trick these rooms out enough with just smart Cling Gem and Sungreave use where you don't need the Ascendant Light. And it is impressive, but if you're going to try and do that on your own time, I'd actually recommend instead trying to do the clip into the gate that's blockading the key, which I believe requires, I want to say just the Cling Gem and maybe the Sungreaves. It's something you do, at least did, relatively early in the speedrun back when I attempted to try doing that, but I don't know how that's evolved since because I haven't really kept track of it the last year or two. Off the top of my head, I believe that required some amount of out-of-bounds involving the other doors in the hallway that leads towards where the major key is, but I'd have to look back at this at that point, and I'll just save that for future me. So this room has a shortcut I've learned to do, namely, this switch and another switch later in the room actively toggle this gate up and down alongside another one in the opposite state. So while this one's down, the other one's up and blocks our progress. You're meant to do a Cling Gem jump onto this wall and hit that switch right there to lower one right about where I am now to get to this pole safely. But if you just charge a Soul Cutter like I did a moment ago, you can just completely skip that step, and honestly, it makes this room so much simpler and safer. With that said, that room is still surprisingly hard. For one reason, I'm really bad about aiming onto the poles with Sybil after a Cling Gem jump. I don't know why in specific after that, but just something about the placement of the camera always messes with me. Getting slightly ahead of ourselves, when we actively head back to the underbelly later this part to go get the major key, there's actively an optional room that has that as a major focus, and it's probably the hardest platforming challenge for me in the game when it comes to just grabbing collectibles. Overall, hardest platforming challenge is probably actively just some of the time trials out right nowadays, but that really depends on if you want to do those at all anyway, let alone get really high par times. They are kind of least also, by the way, in that there's no save point over here, but in the case you're running low on health from failing a jump enough, there is that bench you can sit on to restore your health, and I'd really recommend doing that because dying this close to this major switch over here really sucks. The small switch here just opens up the door, but the large switch opens up that main gate in the main hall of Sansa Keep, finally allowing us to access the throne room where the major key of this area awaits. But that's not all that's here. We still need to do a time trial for this area, and it's actively placed behind the throne on the right next to the key. This is probably my favorite time trial in the game platforming-wise because it just does so much with each of your abilities. There's only really one bubble that's kind of awkward to grab for me, and it's the one specifically in the distance facing the entrance near the pillar on the left. You need to do a Cling Gem around the pillar on that, and that's just never really comfortable to me. But pretty much every other blue gem in here, or blue orb, is really satisfying to grab because there's just so many minor route variations you can do here to make a potentially efficient route. Learning this one is really fun. I think this in general is the one I tend to try and get a gold on the most, even if I'm not exactly the best at it. This one kind of sucks to get, but we got it. There's the gold. This is the one I'm the most consistent about golds on, like I just said. And for clearing that one, we get the aspect of our Guardian. This gives us access to the Guardian outfit, which puts Sybil in a white leotard with some shoulder pads and a little red scarf. This is another one I really like. I think it's actively meant to send up to a lot of like 90s anime outfits from stuff like Slayers and similar fantasy series. I just like the look of it a lot. As for the par times for that specific time trial, to grab the bronze par time, you need to grab all 9 orbs within a minute. To get the silver par time, you need to do so within 40 seconds. And as we just saw there, in order to grab the gold, you need to do it within 30 seconds flat. Very tricky to do, but honestly one of the most satisfying time trials in the game to pull off properly. With that done and over with, Sansa Keep is now completely cleared out, and we can move on to elsewhere. Specifically, we want to head over here near this save point, I think near where we got the strike break, if memory serves. And enter this door finally. You can sunset or high jump up here to access another entrance to the underbelly. This one actively places us right next to my next destination where the major key is for this region, but also we can high jump up here to grab another health piece. Now you might recall last time I said that we reached the max amount of health at 8 pips / 16 half pips. That is correct. But for some reason, there's just an extra piece. I'm assuming it's a factor of they wanted to have some leeway for people reaching max health, so they put an extra one in somewhere just to even the odds with that happening a little bit. Something about it has always kind of bugged me, but I guess it's sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of deal. Having a heart piece adjacent health upgrades in a game about exploration and absurdly well-flowing 3D platforming like this means you might miss something as it is. And I'd rather they have a way for you to still reach max health no matter what, but they can't put too many extra pieces in, otherwise you just have an absurd health total. And in a way, I guess, having only one extra health piece means you're probably going to be like, okay, that's probably just an extra just in case, rather than having 2 extra health pieces where people are going to be combing all over for the 3rd piece so they can complete a set in some way. So this is the room where the major key is here in the underbelly. You're going to need the Ascendant Light alongside the Soul Cutter to get it the way they sort of intend you to on top of the Solar Wind. But remember that story I mentioned earlier in the LP where I started cackling in a way that my friend described as very Lalafell-like in FF14? Yeah, it was this room. I did a very specific Solar Wind jump over towards where the key is, aiming at a wall to the right of it, and cling gemming onto that, and then Sungrief kicking up to the lower part of this platform right here. It was rough, but oh, did it feel so good. Obviously, there's intended, quote-unquote, ways for you to get every single ability in the game, but genuinely, if you ever play this game yourself, I really recommend just trying to figure out room puzzles in ways that may even be unintentional, because if you can figure it out, it is so satisfying. As I just showcased a moment ago on the inventory screen, though, we now have all 5 major keys, so our next destination for main gameplay progression is to head back to the top of the tower remains and access the endgame. With that said, we still have a couple of minor things we want to do across the world, namely time trials. Specifically, I don't think we've done the one in the tower remains itself on top of the one here in the underbelly. Plus, as I talked about a few moments ago, there's one more aspect I want to grab here in the underbelly that actively requires jumping onto some poles, which I have issues doing after cling gem jumps, as I mentioned earlier. First off, we're going to go after the aspect, I believe, and both of these require you to get over back towards the little castle area in the center of the major room here. Thankfully, we're only a couple of hops away from that, because as I jump up here, we're going to quickly find ourselves in a pretty familiar area. Remember that one structure I mentioned in the main room of the underbelly that might come into play later? We're now back over there. If you actively had gone through those rooms earlier in the LP, you would just find yourself at the major key, but pretty unlikely to grab it without either the Cling Gem or the Ascendant Light, depending on what you were doing there. Now, there's something very minor about the map system they added in the one update that I think I may have briefly touched on before. If I didn't, sorry, I probably should have at the time. Specifically, it's that while the map fills in as you explore, and they do mark which room you're in, they don't mark where you are in the room in question on the map. Like, there's no little dot to mark where Sybil is and all that. Which largely doesn't matter, because if you're checking the map as you enter a room to see what the shape of it might be and where a door can be out of it, you're going to be able to use where you are at that entrance to kind of center yourself there. But when you're going back through areas like this for items, that can occasionally mess up your sense of direction a little bit. It really only does that to me either in the Empty Bailey or here in the underbelly, though, specifically in this room if I'm trying to find either one specific power-up we're going after, or if I'm trying to remember which direction a certain door might be in. By doing some Solar Wind jumps over here, though, we can find where the last aspect is in the underbelly, and it's behind a strike back door, so you do need to have the charge strike to get here, as well as the Ascendant Light and the Cling Gem. This is easily, to me, the hardest side platforming section in the game, because you do have to do a lot very quickly, and I've messed up trying to grab onto these specific poles more times than I'd like to admit. The jump cut there was because I failed this for about, like, 7 minutes or so, maybe 8 minutes. This is rough. But for completing it, we get the aspect of martial prowess, which outright increases the amount of damage each of your strikes does, even without the indignation buff. But that said, then that means that indignation buff is even better, because I think you're doing 3 times damage at that point. Really nice. Really nice. So now it's time for us to do the only thing remaining for us here in the underbelly. That is the time trial, which we saw the gem of a moment ago. It's back in the castle segment. You do need to have hit the one switch to the left of a door higher up to access this, but if you were following this as a guide, you probably did that already. This specific time trial can be rough, if only because routing it is weird. The blue orbs are only placed around this whole little castle segment here, but they're placed so widely across it at the different heights that there's probably like 3 different solid routes you can use, but all of them are going to have some really weird and awkward jump, even with Sybil fully upgraded. Specifically, like here, there's this where you need to do a Sungrief kick to get over to this side. There's some wall clings over bottomless pits. Heck, if there's actively a time trial where you want to intentionally take a pitfall just to void out and respawn elsewhere, it's probably this one. It's just awkward. Again, I don't consider this the hardest. I consider the Dilapidated Dungeon one to be the hardest, at least in terms of executing it within the time frame you got. This one's just really wide and routing. It's awkward. Overall, probably the hardest one to execute, though, is probably the one that remains for us after this, the one in the tower remains, because that requires some really good precision, like the Dilapidated Dungeons one, because failing a jump in that one's a lot more costly than most of the other time trials. But also it has some pretty awkward routing you need to figure out, like with this one. It usually takes me less time than the Dilapidated Dungeons one, but that's because, like, there's one jump that's critical at the end of the dilapidated dungeon I just often mess up. Completing that time trial gives you the aspect of nostalgia. This unlocks the costume that's titled 19 in Roman numerals for Sybil. This costume actually has a little bit of history behind it. Specifically, I'm showing off base Sybil right now to compare it, because the 19 costume is what Sybil looked like in the Game Jam version of the game. Pretty similar design, but with some different geometry, a bit of a different scarf, and some different hair designs. I actively really like this one. In regards to par times, though, the Underbelly time trial requires you to grab all 12 orbs within a minute for the bronze par time, 50 seconds for the silver par time, and a ridiculously tight 40 seconds for the gold. That's one I will probably never successfully pull off, knowing me. Because time trial adjacent stuff and me are a little weird in that I'll do it if there's something that's really neat locked behind it, or if it's required for trophies in a game I'm going for trophies in, i.e. Shovel Knight, or usually Sonic games require getting a stage within a certain time limit in some form nowadays. But outside of that, I really don't care about it too much, because either it's just bragging rights, it's potentially leaderboard type stuff, which can be fun in small circles of friends, but I don't really give a shit about it in like a large scale purview. Or it's more of a test of skill to the self, which I have nothing to prove to myself when it comes to that kind of stuff. I got other stuff to do. With that said, with the underbelly now completely cleaned out, we're heading back to the Tower Remains finally, because there's A, a time trial here, and B, well, plot progress is here, like I said earlier. The trip up is pretty easy, too, because all we have to do is climb this elevator here in the bottom room, do the time trial in the second room, and then do the platforming back up to the roof from the second room. There is potentially a reason to, and I did consider only getting the Cling Gem here on my first visit and just doing the time trial as well as grabbing the major key here on the second visit, just so the last key we would grab is directly in front of the big door. But I ultimately decided against that, just so I can get as much done in each area on the first visit and so on. As for where the time trial is here in the Tower Remains, we want to go up these ramps here, and it'll be directly to my left. This is probably the most punishing time trial upon failure, because you fall down to the bottom floor, and the time you waste getting back up here will probably put you over the time limit for whichever par you're going for. You're going to primarily be using solar wind jumps on top of sunset or high jumps and wall clings here, but the real trick is routing, because you need to get a good consistent way to get them all very quickly, while maybe not having too many backtracks across the pit here that you're going across. I generally try to grab all four of the ones that are on top of these grates first, once I get to them, then do the ones that are along the sides, and then finally falling down to the floor below, because the few orbs that are down there or are on the spire on the left here should be really gotten last, just for the sake of not having to backtrack back up here. As for the par times here, you need to grab all 16 orbs within a minute 20 for the bronze par time, a minute flat for the silver, and 50 seconds for the gold. I think I've seen videos of people doing the gold. I will never successfully pull that off myself, because I'm just not that good at the game, frankly. This orb right here is probably the most troublesome one to grab here on the bottom floor, if only because if you mess up trying to get up there, that's so much time wasted towards whichever goal you're going for. But thankfully the last three over here around this spire are very easy to get in sequence. Doing this time trial will unlock our final costume for this playthrough, and the one I'll be wearing throughout the rest of it. This is going to be the aspect of a bleeding heart, which gives us the bleeding heart outfit. While every costume in the game has a different vibe as it is, this one especially does so, because it's the only one that's not really the same general color scheme she starts with. You get a purple outfit, her horns get replaced by a flower wreath, and I think there's also a slight purple gradient to the end of her tail. I honestly really like the vibe of this one. And while we're on the way up, actually, I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the game now, because the thing is, once we get past the final boss, the ending happens and you're just taken right back to the title screen, so I don't have a lot of time to really talk about my thoughts. I absolutely adore this game. I think they were really smart about scope control as well as just game feel, because Sybil is just incredible feeling to play around with in this game. And the level design is some of the smartest I've ever seen in a platformer, let alone a platformer that's also a Metroidvania. I genuinely cannot recommend this enough if you like Metroidvanias or 3D platformers as it is. And for only $6 US on Steam, you could do a lot worse for your money. There's fun speed tech you can do here. There's a lot of alternate routes you can do. You can really... The game is your oyster, honestly, when it comes to exploration. And while I'm usually not too big of a fan of that level of freedom in Metroidvanias, they do it perfectly here. I love this game. the rare proper cutscene in the game, and it's completely silent. Huh. With the big door opened, we can now access the endgame area. This is the distorted memory. Mind you, I say this is the final area. It's more like the final arena. This is more akin to the final trek up to the final boss of Dark Souls 3, if you've ever played that. Come down here, and it's time for the final boss with such a good final boss track. We found the princess. The princess is a big teleporter boss fight, so she'll teleport about the arena doing her various attacks. Most of her attacks are projectiles, but in the case you either get too close or she teleports close to you, she can kick you, which will be followed by her spinning her bladed hair around. You can jump over the kick and slide under the spin, but I'm really bad about reading that for some reason. She also has a secondary spinning attack where she Beyblades around the entire arena like she used the great spin attack from Zelda. She'll just bounce back and forth across it. Jumping around it and avoiding it's the best thing to do there. As for her projectile attacks, she's got this one where she throws a giant bomb at you that you just kind of need to outrun. I don't think you can deflect this one back at her. This is also her most punishing attack too, because while it's slow, I think that touching you does 2 full pips of your health, so watch out. I think she can fire some projectiles at you that are generally gray, that just go in straight lines towards you, and you can deflect those with good timing. Early in the fight, she only fires one, but I think later in the fight, she fires multiple in a row. The attack you really want to see is the one where she teleports to about ground level and then just starts spinning around. At that point, she's gonna fire out multiple purple orbs that look like the Ascendant Light orbs. You can bounce those back at her with the Dream Breaker, and that's a really good source of damage for the fight in general. Plus, it keeps her in one place for long enough that you can get up to her and get some pretty good hits in. The only other attack she has that we haven't talked about yet is the green checkered orbs attack that bounce around the arena wildly. I think you can destroy those, but I've never really tried. I just generally try to take moments like this to keep my distance and either heal up in the case I need to, or just get a good location on her and just keep her in my line of sight. Like with Strong Eyes earlier in the game, you do not have a visible health bar, but you can at least tell how well you're doing in this fight by the music. Namely, as you decrease her health, namely to about, I think, below half, the tempo of the music does actively speed up, so that's how you know you're doing pretty good here. Keep your eyes on your own health, heal up with the Dream Breaker in the case you get low enough, especially with the aspects we have, you can recover a lot pretty quickly. She does throw a lot at you, especially for only being technically the second boss in the game, but thankfully they're very smart about her attacks and that they're pretty easy to figure out once you've seen her do them a couple times. Makes me wish, honestly, that there were more bosses in the game because I really do like how this boss feels. Strong Eyes less so, but this one feels great. Not really the kind of person you want to hang out with, right? I barely remember what she was really like at this point. Oh, sorry. You're probably wondering who I am. Honestly, I don't really know anymore. Nobody special, I guess. But then, that's the whole reason you're here, right? I get it. I can't just hide here forever and pretend I don't exist. I'm sure I'll find something worth being awake for. Maybe I'll finally get into photography. That'd be nice, I think. So, thanks, goat, bunny, cat lady. Sybil? Got it. I'll make sure to write it down as soon as I wake up. I don't want to forget you, too. I'm sure you've got someone else to help out, right? So yeah, thanks. Take care, Sybil. That truly is the most concrete piece of story in the game, and it definitely explains why the game is so dreamlike, because it literally is a dream, but there's a lot of interpretations you could do about the princess's motivation, whether they're actively running from their own life or if they're just a part of someone else's dream. There's some interesting little theories people have put out there, especially on, I think, the music tracks, specifically due to some of the names. For instance, the final boss track is called Paramnesiac, which is someone who can no longer distinguish between reality and dreams. And there's some interesting stuff there, but obviously, like, the story isn't the reason you're here. You're either here for the vibes of the game in general, the really tight platforming, because you got recommended the game by a friend, or you saw the main character's butt on social media at some point, frankly. Like I said earlier, I adore this game. Sybil is easily the most fun I've had controlling a character in a 3D platformer in some years, and the frankly absurdly good level design only assists that. The map they added in that later update also really helps. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great night. Take care. And I'll see you guys next Let's Play, whatever that may be. See you guys then.